Hello, everyone, and welcome to Canadians with Disabilities and Their Allies. My name is Brent Frain. I'm the host. The show is also known as PWD Allies Podcast. Check it out on your Apple App Store, and you can check it on Spotify or, your favorite app, wherever you find it best suited for you. Today, I have Kent Loftsgard joining me. He's a healthcare educator, curriculum developer, and he's also looking at disability through his lens, and so it's focused on his observations of what he sees. And Kent also, he works at UBC, and he's an all right, great guy. It's awesome to have him on, and actually, just to let everyone know too that Kent actually has worked for Vancouver Coastal Health. So if you have questions regarding maybe health stuff, just send them in the comments line if it's related to disability stuff. And with all that being said, I've got Neil Matheson, my editor producer. He's friends with Kent, and it's great. And thank you very much, Kent, for joining me.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to start maybe the show and give people a little bit of a background of like how Kent and I know each other, because I think it was when we were 13, right? It was 13, and it was Easter Seals Camp Squamish, and I remember it was the first night there. I think it was the first night there. There's a communal area where everybody goes and eats. So I think it was around dinner time, or it might have been the morning of the breakfast or whatever. But I'm sitting in this communal hall where everybody's eating, and I remember. Kent, you walking in, and it was like almost like a spotlight was on you as soon as you walked in. I'm like, who is this guy? And I was like thinking to myself, like, I gotta know who this guy is, And it was one of those things. It was like, and we've talked before about how the disability community can be very small, actually, where kind of everybody knows each other. And so Ken and I kind of stayed connected just because, like I said, the community, the disability community is kind of very small, and everybody kind of seems to cross paths and bump into each other all the time. And that's kind of what's happened with Kent and myself.
Almost like that saying, everyone knows your name.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to say before we get started too is like when you started this podcast, Brent, actually when you started on Twitter Spaces at the start, the reason why you did, you've said it a few times, the reason why you did is you saw things happen during the pandemic. You saw a lot of inequalities crop up. I mean, that's kind of the one nice thing about the pandemic is it kind of shone a light on a lot of inequalities. It kind of like shone this big light, right? And while that was going on, even before I knew you, even before you reached out to me, it was, what did we say? It was November of 2021. Even before that, of course, Kent and I always have these big conversations on the phone, like for 1.5 or 2 hours. And we would talk about the thing of, COVID on all these inequalities too. And that it was this thing about how the pandemic really shone a light on a lot of these things, right? And so this is my idea where I wanted to kind of compare and contrast the disability discrimination versus racial discrimination. And I want to start off the show by stating the obvious, like, I'm not a person of color, you're not a person of color, right? But I still want to have the conversation. I'm okay with saying that I know nothing about something. Like we've always said, like, you want to kind of stay in your lane of when you talk about lived experience. You kind of want to stay in your lane, right? So that's why I never want to talk about necessarily homelessness, because I've never experienced homelessness. And I would never want to be really, really vocal about racial discrimination, because I've never experienced that, right? So you can only be really vocal and knowledgeable about something that you're actually knowledgeable about, and then defer to the experts, kind of thing, right? And
well, yeah,
yeah,
it's gathering up, the knowledge, like the information about, from others that have that lived experience, and just and being there as a listener and just understanding, and maybe like what other people are going through, and then that's what I do, and that's why I love the podcast, because it's learning from other people, of learning, going, oh wow, I didn't know that, or yeah, maybe these things that I'll think about this and that, whatever the topic may be, and that's, you're right, Neil, and that's what how the show all became about, is because during the pandemic, there was a lot of inequalities that I kept seeing happening, of provinces like only giving very minimal support, if that. Even some provinces didn't even give any support whatsoever. In BC, they did, but then they clawed it back. They took it away, right? And when I saw that, I was like, okay, so they're taking it away. And then I saw on Twitter sphere, or X, people may want to call it X, or Twitter. I still call it Twitter. Elon may differ with that, but whatever. That's up to him. But when I saw a lot of people crying out, they were crying out for help, because when the federal government announced that Canada Disability Benefit, it's still not. I mean, it's still empty, and now we're like 4 years later, and well, yeah, there's they're maybe come out with it in the budget. I don't know. Like there's talk about, from some of the MPs now, putting pressure on the finance minister about putting that fund in there. But question is now, I mean, I guess, once we dive into the show here right away, is when they said over 1 million people first, it was going to help 1 million people with disabilities in Canada. And then it went to talking point, shifted over to hundreds of thousands. Now I'm hearing tens of thousands. Okay, wow. So what, to the MPs that are listening to this, and to the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister and MLAs and all the provinces and MPPs, who's it really going to go to? Who is it going to help? People on provincial assistance and territorial assistance? Come on, we got to get this right here. Like, we got to make sure that nobody is left behind. So with that being said, I'm going to take a step back here, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Neil, and you can take it from there.
Well, and again, I mean, I promise I'll let you talk, Kent, but the reason why you're on the show too is because you have this critical, analytical, clinical lens, right? You come from the health sector, so you have this clinical, critical lens that you see through everything's through, and so that's how we're going to approach the show. Like I know one of the concerns about when we talk about racial discrimination is it's going to be like this heated emotional mess where we're going to be talking about trauma, and actually, I know trauma exists for a lot of people when you talk about discrimination, but this is not the focus of today's show. Today's show, we're gonna be almost like more observational, like hands, step back a little bit and take a more clinical look at where there's a crossover or intersection between racial and disability discrimination. And with that, I will now turn it over to you, Kent, for a comment. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Neil. You have set the stage
yes.
There for us, I think, in a reasonably appropriate way, except just in terms of correcting sort of our historical timeline, when we first met, which was back in my first year of uh, Camp Squamish of Easter Seals, I was 10
Oh,
then.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah,
are you sure we were 10? Really?
well, I know how old I was anyway.
Oh,
So,
okay. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
it's funny how you can't quite get yeah, it's funny. Okay.
maybe I just seemed like an older person then.
Okay. Yeah.
Go back into the time machine.
Yeah. But
Exactly.
anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
we were known as the Oreo Brothers. We were known as the Oreo Brothers, and we hung around together and we sang a lot. It was a fun year. Yeah.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. There were
Yeah.
a few subsequent iterations of the Oreo brothers, but we were the originals.
We were the original Oreo Brothers. Yeah.
Cool.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, our sentimental history is not the topic of choice for today, but I don't know. Did you have a particular? Because I know we had touched on some things in talking about the potential for this conversation, and I don't know if you wanted to go in a particular direction as far as what you wanted me to comment on.
Well, let's start here. I'm actually glad. You watched yesterday's show, and we were talking about disability culture and one of the things I mentioned is where I talked about Charlotte Whitten, the quote from Charlotte Whitten, who was she's credited as one of Canada's early feminists, and again her quote is, whatever a woman does, she must do twice as good as a man to be considered half as good, kind of thing. And then she says, luckily that's not difficult. And so that was back in the very late 1800s when she was born. So it would have been early 1900s when she made that quote at some point. And so anyway, when I saw that quote, and I got that quote from a curmudgeon calendar that I got when I was like 14 years old, I think. When I saw that quote, I immediately put a disability lens on it. Like, I know it was a feminist quote, but I was approaching it from a disability lens, like, because you can easily replace the word of whatever a woman does. You can easily replace the word of saying whatever a disabled person does, they must do twice as good as an able-bodied to be considered half as good, right? And with that in mind, back in the early days of the pandemic, we have a TV personality here, Sofie Lui. She's a TV broadcaster for Global News, right, and other shows, I think, as well. So she's Asian, and she made I think it was a post on Twitter a while back, when the pandemic first hit, and she made a comment saying, when the racial hatred got to a peak, and where they were blaming all of everybody who was Asian, they were saying it's all your fault that we have this pandemic now, right? And it was a real jump in racial hatred, and she made a post that said, I feel othered, right? And again, so that was one of those comments that she made, and I just wanted to borrow that and say, as a disabled person, I can relate to that, because there's lots of times where, as a disabled person, you can say, yeah, I feel othered, right?
Othered, yeah.
And so again, this is a question of, like, I know that disability discrimination and racial discrimination are two different animals. They're quantitatively different, but I kind of wanted to talk about where they're similar and where they intersect, and kind of go down that garden path. And again, this isn't about digging up trauma, because we know
Right.
we know we can go down that rabbit hole, but we wanted to be more clinical on today's show and take a more objective look at everything.
Even though it is Easter, I mean, rabbit hole, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Bump.
but not bump. That's right.
Yeah.
We need to have a drum kit here. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
So-
thankfully for me, I don't have any racial trauma to report.
Yeah.
In fact, on the topic of I mean, you were just leaning into the intersectionality, as it's called, between race and disability. And for me, and I think for a lot of other racialized people with disabilities, at least visible or congenital disabilities, I have lived a life that I describe as almost entirely free of conscious racism, and meaning that racism that I was aware was happening, because most of the time, if people are looking for a discriminatory lever to use against me, on the hierarchy of socially acceptable discriminatory levers, disability still has a certain degree of acceptability.
Yes.
Yeah. Sure.
In a way, compared to racism. So the only racism really that I have experienced in my life has come from other people with disabilities, and even then only very occasionally, because even though there is a kind of cliquey sort of discrimination that can happen within the disability community based on your degree of disability or your ability to function in society in relative terms or not, I think that, like we were talking about previously, Neil, the topic of disability is still newer
Yes.
to the discrimination conversation.
It's got less history behind it, right?
Than is race, because in order even for disability to enter in to the discrimination conversation, we had to get to where a preponderance of society, at least, was willing to admit or accept that people with disabilities should even have a visibly functional place in the world.
Right. Yeah. Because, like, when you and I were growing up, Kent, and I'm sure it's the same with Brent, because we're all the same kind of generation. I mean, we all learned about Martin Luther King. Like, I have a dream today. Like that speech. Like.
Oh yeah.
I remember seeing it lots.
I remember that one.
Lots in school, right? And so, like, I learned all that. And one thing that's interesting is, you have we've had other guests on. Now I'm having my brain fart now. Jennifer Rocchio,
Right.
and she is Indigenous, and I remember she's been on a couple times talking about the 60s scoop, with the First Nations, the residential schools and the separating of the kids from the parents, and like I never learned that, which is, so like when she actually used the term 60 scoop, like just kind of offhand, I'm like, what's that? Like I of course I knew about the residential school thing, but I didn't know the finite terms of 60 scoop and all that, because speaking for myself, I never learned about the Indigenous thing. Like it was like the government just kind of wants to hide that and bury it, right? And I think that history, when it comes to racial discrimination, it's more kind of frontal cortex type of thing. Like it's right in the front of our brains, because it's like you were saying, Kent. It's we had a longer history of it to settle into our consciousness, right? Whereas it feels like disability discrimination is just only in the infant stages of this discussion. I mean, we can look at that and see a truth to that, because, for example, the CRPD, the Convention for the Rights of People with Disabilities,
that's right.
that was signed on to back in 2010. The
14 years ago.
Yeah, the government said, let's sign on to it. It's a good idea. And what have they done since? Like
Zero.
Nothing. They've done zero.
Same as the CDB.
So that's proof that, as far as the disability discrimination goes, it's just kind of sat there, stale, and we've just kind of sat there sitting in neutral, right?
It's not a priority to the government, right?
It's not a priority. It's not like frontal cortex as much as, and maybe like people that are listening can disagree, but I know that. I know that Kent and I have these conversations all the time where we say, like Kent was saying, we have that hierarchy of needs. It's almost like a hierarchy of discrimination. And right now, I would say, this is my opinion, and Kent can jump in or not, but I would say that disability discrimination is right at the very bottom of the hierarchy of discrimination.
Well, I'll give you my little take, and then I'll jump over to Kent on this one. It's kind of related to what you were just mentioning there, Neil. It's like the 6C scoop. Me too. Like I never learned any of that in growing up, going through school. They never taught us that. I knew, like the same as yourself. I knew about the murdered Indigenous children. When growing up. But I didn't know the terminology of 6C scoop until I started doing my Twitter space show when it launched that way, and that's how I got to know about this. And for me, it was not really like an ableist type of thinking, but I was like, wow, like I basically got educated by the people who know what happened, and the citizens of Canada that know what happened. Maybe that they're grandchildren of the parents, etc., but or some of them have lived through it, growing up, and that's it's sad. But fast forward, going through that is through like a disability lens of, and as a person with a disability, it's like the government wanted to put it aside so that people didn't know about the 6C scoop. They didn't want people to know about that. They don't want people to have disabilities to say, now we got to focus on people with disabilities in Canada. We never had to before. Why do we have to do it now? It's the same as Indigenous. It doesn't matter if it's people with disabilities. All these things have come forward. I've noticed that too since the pandemic. It's really brought out a lot of all the inequalities of mismanagement, shall we call it, from the government, from all levels. Provincial, federal. Provincial says, well, federal's going to deal with it. We don't have to deal with it. Pass the buck over. We don't want to deal with it. It's like same as disability, Indigenous. There was the Asian culture, Asians that came over during way back before the World War. Same thing. Now they said they want to resolve the faults and the provincial government owned up to it and said, we did wrong. We must correct this. And so what I'm saying to the government too, and I'm going to pass over to Kent, I just get your kind of lens on this, is that they're now acknowledging that, yeah, we did wrong. I want to know, how are you going to now fix it and actually prove that you actually care about your citizens in the country going forward? Sonia always says to me, and I've said this on the podcast too, and a lot of people in the disability community and organizations across Canada say the same thing. They're going to believe it when it's in the bank account.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to get your take on this, Kent.
Sure, Brent. And I'm just reflecting on what you were just talking about there. I was also one of those that had no idea about the residential schools or the
Yeah.
60s scoop or any
Yeah.
of that until I started working in Canadian health and science spaces.
Mhm.
I had no idea that the residential schools had ever even existed, never mind that the last of them only closed in 1990 something,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is
Wow.
which is frighteningly recently.
Yeah.
And to their credit, the Canadian health and science space has made a concentrated reconciliation effort to bring voices of Indigenous communities, particularly, into collaborative conversations
Mhm.
on health and science initiatives, as a way of sort of correcting, attempting to correct some of the imbalances and injustices that had previously been experienced. There is a commitment on the part of the government at all levels, municipal, provincial, federal, to engage in that kind of reconciliation. But where I think that they have sometimes been a bit short-sighted in these equity, diversity, and inclusion type conversations is that in a recruitment sense of looking at who needs to be at the table to engage in these kinds of equality and equity conversations,
Mhm.
the government at various levels has had a propensity to think, okay, if I've covered my Indigenous representation, then I'm all good for diversity.
Mm. Yeah.
and and obviously, as a person who is not Indigenous but ticks most of the rest of the diversity boxes, I want to kind of perpetuate the notion that we need to think a little bit more broadly about the voices at the table and the intersecting experiences of different racial groups, whether they are people of multiple minorities or not. Uh, you know,
Mhm.
like I am, and like others of your past guests, I'm sure have been. Um,
Absolutely.
and that's an ongoing conversation, and part of how it relates to our experiences in the health and science system is that even though we have social research
Mhm.
that shows that racialized people have better health outcomes when they can have an ongoing, consistent continuity of care style relationship with a health professional who is racially similar to them,
Mhm.
because um, it's easier to build a trustworthy relationship there when you believe that you're dealing with someone who has come from similar experiences and understands your racial reality. Even though we have that research that shows that those people have better outcomes, there are still significant barriers to
Mhm.
health professional education for racialized people.
Yeah, and it's given the people the proper supports and services that they need to better their well-being, and it puts less strain on our healthcare system, giving people the adequate income, the housing that they need, the medical supports that they need. If it's either different medications that they need, like a pharmacare program, is it a accessibility devices? I mean, and that goes for anyone with a disability, regardless on who they are. Like it's indigenous people with disabilities, seniors with disabilities. I mean, and again, I think that's where the government has fallen short. Like really, I give them a big F on that. Like they fail, in my opinion, they fail for seniors with disabilities because it's the cutoff where they say, oh, you reach 65, oh, you're not disabled anymore according to the government. You need to just go on a old age pension. but then you lose all your other supports. And that has to change. And I think the opportunity as society, regardless of the if or the Asian descent, or the Indigenous, or a person of color, person who is a Canadian Caucasian, Canadian born, and I'm not using any ratio of kind of pegging different people against people. So anyone listening to this or watching this is not for me pointing of going, okay, well, this classification, I mean, everybody needs to be included in the development of a national program that's going to take care of people. I mean, our taxes, like every time, we go to the store, and you buy groceries. I mean, if it's food, it's not tax, but anyway, I mean, in general, we pay tax upon tax upon tax at the gas pump. Same thing. We all pay tax, so we're all taxpayers, and one way or another. And I guess the myth, Kent, is, well, people say, oh, well, but the people with disabilities on social programs, I guess that's the government calls them social programs. They used to be pensions, at one time. But they're all taxpayers one way or another. And I know that Joseph, he would always dive into this when we'd have him on.
And this gets back to the whole idea of like why I like to borrow things like the feminist lens of whatever a woman does, she must do twice as good as a man, or the Sofie Lui comment of, that I feel othered. I mean, those are the things that we can borrow as a disabled community. We can borrow that and see that, like, for example, like we were saying, that the again, this is a generalized comment, but I would argue that the racial discrimination is kind of more frontal cortex than the disability discrimination is. If you were to hierarchy it, I would say that the disability is more at the bottom because we don't have the history. There's not as rich of a history, if you want to call it that, as the discussion of the, racial discrimination, right?
But you know what I think I noticed though too, Neil, and I'll get Kent's take on this is, as I always mention, almost every podcast I mention the same line, but I'll really summarize it really quickly here. As we all age, we get more disabilities, or we get disabilities that are just invisible, that we don't realize that are there unless they're diagnosed by a physician. Now, not enough physicians around, so hard to diagnose these things. Dr. Google, and so, but going forward is you're born with a disability, you're going to have more disabilities, and as we age, we get more disabilities. And I've noticed that during the pandemic, there's a lot of people that are getting disabilities that never had them, and they don't realize how inadequate that the income supports are in the provinces. I mean, like some provinces will say, well, you get more in that province and we get less, or it's the cost of living. And really what it boils down to, it's all taxation on which provinces are taxed more than other ones. So there needs to be an even playing field, because it really puts strain on our healthcare and the person's well-being. It diminishes their quality of life. My belief is always that if you take care of your citizens, they're going to take care of society.
Well, and again, this goes back to the conversations that you and I would have over the phone all the time, Kent. When the pandemic first hit, and then they rolled out the CERB, right, where everybody got $2,000, and people with disabilities got nothing, and your whole thing was, wait a minute, Jack, something's wrong, not right here, right? And so we would have these conversations like that. Right there is pointing to inequality or discrimination, as saying that people with disabilities deserve to be othered. They deserve to be considered less than, right? And of course, Kent, you know all about my story about the clawback of my pension. This idea that, the Human Rights Tribunal has told me that as long as the discrimination is equally applied, they've told me that to my face, as long as discrimination is equally applied, as long as we mistreat somebody that is old, like an elderly woman, like a plus 65 woman, as long as we claw back her pension too, the same as we claw back your pension, it's no longer discrimination. And this idea that they can just kind of have this big wide brush and say, you know, all these people on income assistance, they can just be othered and can be considered less than. I mean, you know, like I was saying with frontal cortex, like nowadays, we would never do that with if you were talking about racial discrimination. Like if you're talking about racial discrimination, I mean, of course, you know, something like the Indigenous community. I mean, we're still getting through all that mess. I mean, we're talking like decades, if not centuries and centuries of abuse there. So, and again, because I mean, far be it for me to like step forward and say that I know everything. I don't. Right.
Well, it's like people with disabilities. It's like it stems way back, but it really wasn't really focused on.
Yeah.
And it's about, you know, it's about Indigenous, about the all the discrimination, and I think everything's now all coming out, and that's kind of where the pink unicorns pop up here too. It's,
you know, and one quick little comment I'll make, you know, with Adolf Hitler, before he killed all the Jews, he killed all the people with disabilities first. A lot of people don't acknowledge that or realize that, but he actually cleansed. He did the ethnic cleansing of making sure that he killed all people with disabilities first before he went after the Jewish community. He went after everybody with a disability first and killed them first. So that again shows you what we're talking about here is that, you know, and again we're talking general terms, but I would say for the most part, you know, government now knows what they did wrong with respect to, again, in general terms, what they've done wrong to the Indigenous community, and they're trying to right the wrongs that they did. So again, that's more frontal cortex to the government. That conversation is more frontal cortex to them than anything to do with disability discrimination. Right.
Yeah, that's what we're teaching them going forward. We're teaching them that yes, things can change, and we're teaching them that, and basically steering them in the right direction. I hope, you know, to do the right thing, in, you know, rewriting legislation. And what's your take on that? I know it might be kind of awkward, but on that, Kent, is I mean, in BC, I'll just use BC as an example here. I mean, our current government's actually rewriting legislation. So they mentioned anyway, tinkering around with all these bills, the bill, but all the different policies. Yeah. Bill 7, but they said they were going to do a complete overhaul. I don't know. I just think it's just been tinkering around, saying, look what we did.
Look what we did. Yeah.
It's I guess my question is that. It was always implemented in their policy and the government's policy for persons with disabilities that they had to be looking for work, but it was actually never imposed in. Now they're relaxing that part. Okay, so now they're backing away from people with disabilities, but now they're looking at people on income assistance. Okay, under the same ministry, which, in my view, it should always be a separate ministry. Yes. And I think that's something that I'm going to keep pushing the government on and keep advocating. There should be two separate ministries, because right now that legislation, it still falls under the same umbrella. But what they're doing is saying people on income assistance, they will still get their money, but they now need to do a jobs plan, and they need to show that they're actually looking for work. Yeah. So, but if they say no, and the ministry feels that in the new legislation that they're developing, they feel that no, I can't do that work, and the ministry feels that yes, it's a job, they can actually take away your money. So it's forcing them to do it, and I think I mean, it's not a bad thing. And people watching, listening to this, it's not a bad thing if a person's able to do something. More power to them. But if they're not able to do something, I think that they need to maybe look at as an individual case-by-case situation. Maybe that person on income assistance is disabled and they're pending to get onto disability, but they can't find a family doctor or somebody to do the medical forms, but they're still going to be falling under that legislation where they're going to be obligated that they have to follow the minister's guideline. So it's a slippery slope. I still think that a national program might be the best way for people with disabilities. That way it's not all this pieces of puzzles like this and this equals this, right? I mean, because what happens if that doesn't fall through? Now the other one goes, oh, right. So anyway, your take on that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of highly pertinent issues there that you just raised, Brent, with regard to, you know, the aspiration to having the federally harmonized disability benefit. Obviously, the benefit of that, like part of what you were just saying, is that it's going to be a harmonized system between the provinces. There'll be a harmonized system between federal and provincial benefits, so that we won't have these, you know, painful clawbacks that are notoriously inconsistent even between one province and the next. And so if there is no consistent rationale for having it, you know, one way or the other, because some provinces claw back certain things, other provinces don't. Why do the ones that do what they do, and why do the ones that don't not?
Can I break out in song now?
Yeah.
One of these things is not like the other. One of these things is not the same.
Exactly. And because these are the people in our interprovincial neighborhood, you know, we should be, I think we should be talking more consistently to each other about what, you know, what works and what doesn't, in terms of achieving not just equality but equity. And equity, again, is that idea of those who need more resources, those who need customized resources, get more according to their circumstances.
Yeah, and you know, again, you know very well my whole thing about the clawback, right? And the way the clawback is set up now, it's like, you know, the provincial government says, yes, we will support you to the full amount of, right now it's, you know, $1,500 if you're a single person in BC here, right? Roughly around there. But, you know, God forbid if your wife dies, then we're going to have to claw back all of the support from you, you know? And it's like, on what world does that make sense? It's like, you know, it's almost like gaslighting. It's like the government's gaslighting me and saying, you know, it's your fault if you didn't have your wife die. It's your fault, because if you didn't have your wife die, we would still be supporting you, but we can't support you anymore because you had your wife die. Too bad. We're going to claw back all this money from you now. You know,
it isn't just, though, that your wife died. It's that your wife died in a circumstance after which she had been a contributing working person enough to have paid in to become a beneficiary of a pension program. And I think that there are several ways that the government and different kinds of policymakers will often say, yay, rah, 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 we want you to be able to do this with one hand. But then in other cases, they will go, wait a minute, you're not supposed to be able to do that with the other.
Yeah.
Because
with the other.
Because in one sense, they're changing policy now to recognize that not everybody is going to be able to work, and that for some people, caring for their health condition is its own full-time job.
Yeah, I mean, they should have a consistent goalpost not like change and say, well, this person over here deserves a subsidy, like a rent subsidy, and sorry, Neil, you don't deserve any kind of subsidy because your wife died. Sorry, too bad. You know, they have all these kind of like inconsistency of cherry picking of like, you deserve this and this cherry picked over here doesn't deserve this, and it goes on and on of like, like we've said before, of disabled person versus disabled person, and
unicorn.
rent subsidy versus clawbacks, and on it goes, right?
But again, it's not just because your wife died. It's because your wife died as an income earner. If your wife had died as a
Yes.
benefits recipient,
Yeah.
then you would be just as entitled to all the benefits,
Right.
that we're talking about. But
Yeah.
because your wife died in a circumstance where she dared to tread on
Yeah.
a contributing role in society that some policymakers or not might have believed that she wasn't really supposed to be able to do that,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
then that now has consequences for you, because
Yeah.
on one hand, the government now is recognizing that some people caring for their health condition is its own full-time job. And I think that they need still to be even more explicit about who is able to work under what circumstances and still keep their full benefits.
Yeah.
I, I mean, Neil, you remember back in the day when you were one of the people that came on board with us at Disability Foundation when there was all different kinds of community connecting sort of employment advocacy type of programming going on there, helping people with disabilities to get jobs. There were a number of prospective clients that didn't understand even the realm of possibility as it existed back then, and were too afraid to even try to be meaningfully employed because they didn't want to threaten their benefits.
That's true. That's true. But also this idea, I mean, you touched it on already, but this idea that the government says, okay, we'll allow you to work, we'll allow people with disabilities to work, but we won't allow you to enjoy the benefits of working, like the benefits, if you pay into a pension, we're going to ignore that. We're going to disrespect that as a work benefit, or that if you get injured on a job, like a WCB claim, we'll claw that back too, because that's kind of your fault too, the government says. So and you don't deserve that either. You don't deserve that benefit either. So we'll claw that back, and on and on and on it goes, right?
It's understandable that your view of things is a little bit cynical.
I am cynical,
but I think there's a number of reasons that we can be encouraged. One of those reasons is that just recently, the BC Human Rights Commission has begun to make it more plain in the form of a public awareness campaign that they have meaningfully started to look at, education to address the systems of systemic discrimination. Now, to whatever degree they're willing to challenge government policy, remains to be seen. But where we have some bright spots where they have actually been able and willing to address systemic discrimination is in recent cases involving the ride-sharing services of both Uber and Lyft. They have ruled that they have 1 year to arrange to offer accessible services in BC, and that a payment of a prearranged fee that was part of their original contractual deal to operate in BC is not an excuse not to offer accessible services. So we'll see where that goes. And then earlier on in the conversation, and in several other conversations that you guys have had on this podcast, you've talked about the looming promise of the Canada Disability Benefit, and what will that what will that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And
What a gong show that is, that's for sure.
and we know that something good is coming, and we have some idea when, but we're still left with a black box of question marks in terms of specific numbers.
Yeah.
That that part is a problem. But back in back in the day, a few years ago, after the whole Canada Disability Benefit conversation got stirred up by that inequality and inequity that happened in the offering of the CERB, and then there was a one-time $600 payment to eligible people in the disability community, in the interprovincial benefits recipients crowd. And even then, I remember, and Neil, I'm sure you and I talked about this at the time, but I talked to a number of people about even if they were only going to do a one-time payment for people with disabilities, how did they come up with the number $600?
Yeah.
Why wasn't it a one-time payment of $2,000?
Yeah.
Because if the immediate calculation that led to the CERB was, okay, the minimum standard that it takes to have a happy life in Canada is $2,000 a month. Why not that for people with disabilities? Because whether you're a benefits recipient or not, whether you're an earning person, a taxpayer or not, and you have a disability, even if you make all the money that anybody could make, having a disability is always more expensive than not having one.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Kent, there's a little clip I'm going to play for you. It was a recent little audio for our listeners who are maybe listening in later on the podcast, or if you're watching live. It was from an MP, Mike Morrice, from Kitchener, Ontario, and he made a statement, and then you'll hear the response from their Prime Minister regarding the Canada Disability Benefit. I just thought it'd be, since we're talking on that topic, I think it would be good for people that maybe if they don't know what, maybe they've heard, hey, well, I heard something about this. I'm going to play this, and hopefully it'll come through.
Advocacy of people with Mr. Speaker, thanks to the powerful advocacy of people with disabilities across the country, every MP in this House supported legislation meant to lift people with disabilities out of poverty. 9 months later, still no commitment from this government to fund what will be called the Canada Disability Benefit. When it came to MAiD legislation, this government sure moved fast to make sure people with disabilities could die well. Will the Prime Minister show he's ready to ensure kids with disabilities live well by committing to a fully funded benefit by budget 2024?
Yeah, I saw that one. Yeah.
And budget 2024, we still don't have it in terms of those specific numbers.
Yeah, it'll be released on April. Is it April 16, Brent?
That's really important to be there to both protect people when they're most vulnerable and be there to support their wishes. That is something that is foundational in Canada. In regards to people living with disabilities, we have invested more in people with disabilities over the past 8 years than ever before, and there is more to do. We were very, very pleased to move forward on the Canada Disability Benefit, and we will have more to say in the coming months.
Yeah.
Okay, all of our ears will be open for whatever is to be said in the coming months. And, here we are still waiting for that, because I think the biggest benefit of the harmonized Canada Disability Benefit will be the ending of the clawbacks, and so
potentially it should, but maybe they're gonna find a way of not doing it somehow. I don't know.
Because that part is part of the legislation that's already been passed, that was part of the non-negotiables from back when Carla Qualtrough was still on that file. Now what they have to figure out, though, is the regulations about who is eligible, and I think that's a fairly easy question, who is eligible.
Yeah.
And then how how do they get the how do they get the funds from one person to the next? Because what I think is the plan to happen is that the harmonization comes in that part of the money will still come from the province, and then it'll be subject to a federal top up. But but what I don't know, uh, and maybe somebody who has been paying even closer to attention to the CDB file than I have might know, will it be a federal responsibility then to distribute those funds, or will the responsibility for distribution of the funds fall back to the provincial authorities that do that now?
Yeah,
Yeah, that is one of the questions that I had a big discussion with other MPs that I've had on my podcast too, and also listening to other disability advocates across Canada. My understanding is Mike Morrice, the MP for Kitchener, Ontario, and he had brought forward a part of it in a bill, like it was a part of one of the agreements, was that it's supposed to automatically go to everybody on provincial and territories automatically, where they don't have to have a DTC in order to qualify. He said he doesn't want that to be part of the criteria, and that it would automatically go from as a top up, as you mentioned, Kent, as a top up to provincial. Yeah, but that is the big question: is that who's going to administer it? Is it going to be the federal or is it going to be provincial? My concern, my worry is that if it goes to provincial, now provincial loves to claw things back, but if it goes to provincial, how much is that? Is it going to be 100% of that funds from feds going to go to provincial, or are they going to keep some of it and say, here, we're going to keep this, but we're going to give you this? Well, how much did the feds give you?
Yeah.
That's what I'm kind of wondering too, is, or if it comes right from feds, well, we know it's going to be 100% because that's what they committed. But
they've already kind of given a ballpark figure. I know that Sheila Malcolmson herself, here in BC, our minister here, she's actually thrown around the number of $2,100 a month. That's for a single $2,100 a month. That's kind of what she considers the market basket measure, or what's the other one?
Yeah,
actually?
it's the LICO one.
The LICO formula, yeah.
Like recently, Neil was at a rally that Sonia, Jeff, and myself and Jeff's friend Peter, we attended a rally in front of the BC legislature in Victoria here last Saturday, and it was pouring out. But hey, rain or shine, advocacy doesn't stop, right? I mean, kick them when they're down, they're going to keep on picking themselves up and keep going forward. So we were there, and one of the local MLAs, who is an independent MLA in the legislature now, it's unfortunate, but that MLA actually showed up, actually just to show solidarity to us as a disabled community in BC, and also to represent disabled people across Canada. And actually did say that he hears our voices. He does agree that yes, the rates need to be increased to no less than the poverty level. And that question did come up from Jeff, is that, well, the rates need to be no less than poverty level under the MBM, which is 2104, and that was last year's formula. And of course, as we talked about CERB, I mean, the Prime Minister said $2,000 at one time was the base amount, but that wasn't even including persons with disabilities. That's a base amount to get by. But 2104, as we know, I mean, it's obviously a lot more than that, but compared to what the disability supports are in BC and all the other provinces and territories in Canada, some are a little bit higher, some are a little bit lower. Alberta's is definitely higher than BC, but BC's cost of living is also much higher, as we know. As the politicians keep saying, BC is the most expensive place to live and to do business with, and so I know we know that, right? I mean, look at the shelter rate. I mean, that's just they need to get rid of that altogether. But that's another topic in itself. But going forward on that is, like 2104. That's the base formula, MBM, and the other one is LICO. LICO would been LICO formula would have been better in my view, because it would have actually given a little bit more. But Minister Malcolmson wants to kind of go coincide with the federal counterparts, because that's how they're working with the Canada Disability Benefit. Now, I guess the sooner the better they get this out to people, because in BC, as we know, there was nothing in the budget this year. We just talked to our landlord the other day, and Sonia says, well, you do know that we didn't get an increase in this year's budget. Oh, no, that's not good. Yeah. No. And I go, no, it's not. That we got a rent increase from you, but hey, nothing in the budget. But I guess the way I'm looking at it, in my opinion, if the government's watching this, in my opinion, so what do you tell your landlord? I mean, any PWD and market housing, what do you tell your landlord? Hey, the government don't care because they're waiting on the feds. Now, we know how long the feds has taken, 4 years at minimum. But since they launched that Canada Disability Benefit, so what, are you supposed to not have it increased from the provincial government? I mean, go a year, skip a year. I mean, life doesn't work that way, but yeah. Here's not an Easter, a April Fool's joke coming up for April 1st, because there won't be a show on April 1st. So the politicians get a 4% wage increase as of April 1st, automatically. PWD, nothing in this year's budget. How does that work?
Yeah.
Your thoughts, Kent, and on that one? I'm just going to sit back. And
disability benefits have traditionally just not been good at keeping pace with the cost of living. And you mentioned the shelter rate, Brent, and that
yes.
and that made me think about how, the shelter rate has never been even close to approaching market rental rates.
Oh, I know.
The shelter rate has always been designed for people that have access to rent controls and housing subsidies,
which is maybe at the most, at the very most, about 25% of the population.
Oh yeah, and there's like a
for people with disabilities, at least, anyway.
Yeah. I think that's a generous estimate.
That's being very generous, by the way. Yeah.
Oh, very generous. Yeah.
But I wonder if the government somewhere has statistics about how many people with disabilities are actually benefiting from housing subsidies, as opposed to how many people with disabilities are waiting for subsidized accommodation.
Oh. Yeah, see that's the stats on that is it's right now it's unlimited, the waiting list, because the demand for subsidized housing for individuals who want to have cheaper rent, and now in order to get cheaper rent, the government says, well, you have to get into subsidized housing. But I think people should have that autonomy and making that decision and living where they want to live. So if they want to live in market housing, they want to go and rent in a basement suite somewhere, townhouse, or a condominium, wherever they want to rent, they should be able to rent where they want, but have enough income in order to pay that amount. But the government says, well, yeah, you want cheaper housing, we'll get you into subsidized housing. However, I talked to BC Housing on that topic. I said, well, so I pay market rent. Oh, okay. How do I get in that BC Housing? I want to pay cheaper rent. It doesn't work that way, sir. You have to be homeless. I say, what? Oh, yeah, you got to be homeless. So, okay, so what do I do? How do I get myself kicked out of my housing? What? Yeah, how do I get myself kicked out of my housing so I'll become homeless so that I can now qualify for subsidized housing? No, it doesn't work that way, sir. Your house has to be sold, condemned. You need to be fleeing violence. There's so many different criteria, and even then, you're on a waiting list. It's first come, first serve. We take families and children and individuals. Well, yeah, you have to wait. And then once you are accepted, here's the thing. Once you are accepted, it has to be in the community that the government says that housing is available. So you need to take it when it's available. I think there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that need to be fixed. I did come with an idea, Kenton, maybe you get your opinion on this. Obviously it's your opinion, but I had passed this idea to the provincial government, the minister who's in charge of social development and I don't know, poverty reduction. Sorry. When I say escalation, because it feels that way when there's no increase, right? I mean, things go up in price. So it should be poverty elimination, really. But basically what the resolution I came to her with an idea was to extend it over. If you're familiar with SAFERS, now seniors have a SAFERS program. So elderly seniors, they can apply for a rent subsidy program. They can still live in their same home. They don't have to move. They don't have to go to BC Housing Umbrella. So they can still live in their own home. They apply for a subsidy, and it just reduces down the amount that they actually need to pay out of their own pension. And then they get the money as a subsidy from the government. And they get that plus their money out of their pension, and they pay it to their landlord. So the landlord's still getting the same equal amount of rent that is due every month. Now the other one is called RAP, Rental Assistance Program. That's for single mothers, single fathers.
Not for me though.
Not for Neil though. No. But that should be, you should be included in that too. Like there should be another section including that. But but of course again, they can apply for that subsidy. They can live in their own home. They don't need to move. Now people with disabilities, no, they get, as you mentioned, and I talk about this all the time on the podcast, that silly shelter portion that was implemented in decades and decades and decades ago. It's been inadequate. It's now beyond. It's a joke. It's a laughing matter. Landlords look at it and they say, well, we don't want you using your support portion of your income to basically pay for high market rent. So now it's discrimination. They will actually look at it and say, no, I'm not going to rent a PWD. My solution to the minister is, and still stands, it needs to be implemented in so they can have rent geared to income. But it doesn't need to be the household. It needs to be based on the individual in that household. So they don't have to move. They can still live in where they want to live. They live in a nice place, or they live in the community that they love, they want to be in. Yeah, I mean, they can still pay their landlord that rent. So I think it would be equalized across the board. And yes, and Neil, your circumstance, it should be included in that too.
Yeah. I mean that's the piece that's really missing from our PWD income assistance program, is this idea that people with disabilities deserve autonomy. That is the one piece that's really missing. It's like, there is no autonomy in the system. I mean, we had the MLAs when they were debating in question period about the Bill 7.
Yes.
You had.
That was a heated discussion.
Yeah, you had Sonia Firstno talking about the wheel of pain, and I mean, it is. It's a wheel of pain, right? And the whole thing is just ridiculous. And it was all a whole bunch of back and forth. And it was Anna Molson was talking about it too, and it's like, well, how come just doing a little bit more better than they were? It's like. Yeah. They're congratulating themselves, falling all over themselves, look at what we're doing, and they're just
patting themselves on the back, saying, "Look, we
just
did."
a tiny bit better, and and I've always said, it's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. The boat is still going down. All you're doing is making it look maybe a little bit different or a little bit more pretty.
Yeah, painting them up,
and that's it.
Yeah.
Jack and Rose could both have fit on the door, though.
That's true. That's true. I always thought that was a weird ending for them. It's like, why did they share the piece of wood?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, we have come to the end of the show already. It was a good discussion, though.
It was very good. Very good discussion. But before we basically end our comments for the show, what's your take on that, though, Kent? When it comes down to some of this legislation, I think the way I look at it, I think disabled should have its own ministry, and I think people on income assistance should have its own ministry, because the fact is that obviously this legislation, it really falls under still an umbrella, but it kind of tweaking it, saying, well, yeah, they don't have to comply with this part of the regulations. They do, people. So it's it's again the pink unicorn scenario of have and have nots. One comment though that was given from the independent MLA agreed with Jeff though, Neil and Kent, where Jeff had said we need to get rid of the shelter portion altogether. And Adam Walker, he was there. He was the NDP MLA for Parksville. He's an independent MLA now. He showed up there, and it was so nice. Miss Malcolmson did send her comment in that she wanted to be there, but unfortunately she was not able to be there for the rally. It's unfortunate, but don't worry, Miss Malcolmson. There's going to be a lot more rallies going forward. Jeff's planning on putting more weekday ones on, so I'm actually really looking forward to it because that way a lot of MLAs in the legislature will be able to participate when the session's in place coming up. I'm looking forward to that, having the interactions with MLAs and having their feedback of saying how do we eliminate poverty by raising the rates up. But he agreed that the rates have to be raised up, and he agreed that we need to get rid of that shelter because with high rents, as we're talking about, I mean that shelter portion is a joke. I mean the only solution is, like he said, is to get rid of that shelter portion because people are living in their homes. They're living, in their homes. They're living in their homes in a car. I guess that's what they call a car or some kind of tent, a makeshift tent or a motor home or whatever it is, but they don't have a fixed address. Yeah. So because the government says you don't have a fixed address, you do not get your shelter portion. Well, now they have to prove that they need to get housing. So in order to get that, you need to have your address. So maybe that they're paying a friend of theirs. They can, hey, I got a couch. You can go and sleep on my couch for a couple of weeks. Basically give them like $400, $500, whatever it is. But the government says, no, it's not a fixed address. You need to have a lease agreement. Well, so, yeah, crazy.
One of the things, again, we're at the end of the show, but one of the things we didn't even touch on, and maybe we should have, but it's a big can of worms, is because Kent, you're well into the health sector. Like you've spent many years in the health sector now, in provincial health, and you were involved in panel discussions when it came to MAiD. You were kind of heavily involved in that, being a one of the people that were advocating for certain rules, certain standards that had to be met, right? And I mean that could be a whole other show, but I mean, there again, I mean that's why it's so important to advocate for a proper amount, because it's mind-blowing to me that the federal government has spent way more time and attention on expanding MAiD well before they even give any time and attention to, like, let's give a proper amount to support our most needy, right? As Mike Morrice alluded to, is that the federal government is more prepared to send people to their death than they are to give people a proper life, right?
Well, yeah. With that being said, I'd love to extend the invite to have you come back on, Kent, and we could maybe do another segment and continue where we left off on this topic. What Neil just mentioned on all the impacts of the healthcare, the inequalities of income, and how it affects a person's well-being, their health, and we can maybe dive into that part and kind of really put a lens on it. And what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that obviously there's a lot to say about the evolution of medical aid in dying policy and the implications that has for the disability community, particularly as a recommended substitute for insufficient social policy, which is a growing problem. And back when I was part of the ethics service at Providence Healthcare was when MAiD first came into effect in Canada. And initially, honestly, I felt like it was at first a little bit too difficult for people who should be able to qualify for it to get it. Now, I feel like the policy has gone a little bit too far, maybe in the other direction. And I'm very thankful that even though they are still considering the implications of MAiD for people whose only diagnosed condition is a mental health condition,
Yeah.
at least the mental health care community was smart enough to say, wait a minute, Jack, there's that phrase again. You know, that we just didn't feel ready to respond to how do we screen and qualify people in an equitable way if MAiD is going to be allowed for people whose only diagnosed condition is a mental health condition. That relates, Brent, to something else that you just said before about how you feel like disability should be its own separate ministry,
Yeah.
which is one of those things that I've been saying for years, especially because there is this oddly confusing interplay between disability and healthcare policy. And in the way that our provincial government attempts to address disability, it is a sort of a sometimes confusing hybrid of strange bedfellows of partially social policy and partially healthcare policy. Right? So I think that there are, you know, still several things to untangle there. I also wanted to mention that the idea in terms of the housing subsidy question, that your proposal for how to address that is very similar to something that I have, you know, discussed with ministers of yesteryear about aspiring to what I called benefit portability, so that you don't have to spend all this time and the complicated ways of applying for certain properties where where subsidies are available. You should be able to take your subsidy to where you want to live, and your subsidy should not be a set dollar amount. Your subsidy should be based on a percentage of market rent.
Yeah, like
I think
30%.
Right.
30%.
I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I think is the best way to do it. And then Neil, for you, I mean, you've been in another one of these sort of pink unicorn style situations, you know, under the maybe you're not really supposed to be able to do that style umbrella,
Yeah.
as you know, as like someone who
How dare you try to have a mortgage?
right,
Yeah.
who once upon a yesteryear was able to become a homeowner,
Yeah.
but now, because you have been a homeowner, you don't qualify for anything that would otherwise fall under the rental support programs, because these rental support programs and these kinds of programs that are available to people with disabilities and seniors don't consider that even if you have a purchased home that is completely free of your mortgage anymore, if you live in a condo, you still have maintenance fees.
Don't I know that? Yeah.
And maintenance fees by themselves is like a kind of rent payment.
Yeah, it is.
Exactly. Yeah. Totally.
And on top of that, you also still have property tax
Property taxes. It's going to be huge this year. It's going to be massive, I know. Yeah.
And so, in a policy way, I don't know of any way that our provincial government is considering the impact of those fixed expenses on residents with disabilities that happen to be in a little bit different housing situation. And the way that the separate ministries thing kind of plays into another aspect of the healthcare considerations is in BC and in several other provinces, we have joint delivery of mental health care services and addiction care services. And ideally, if you're somebody who has thought about it like I have, you might consider the idea that mental health care and addiction services really should be delivered separately also. Because even though there are mental health effects that result from substance use and addiction, not everybody with a mental health condition necessarily has an addiction or a substance use problem. And so there can be a stigmatizing effect that disincentivizes people from seeking care because they don't want to be grouped in with the addiction crowd.
Yeah. And there's the other aspect too. In people that have disabilities that say they're on a waiting list to get into subsidized housing, the government says, well, you know what, we have a place that we made a housing announcement and we're making 20 units available for persons with disabilities at ultra low rents, their shelter portion, $500 a month. But now I was reading an article, I'll have to get that to you, Neil, but they had some of the comments under it are not so nice. Someone says, well, there was some other individuals who needed maybe some extra help with some other medical resources that maybe need that extra help to work with their situation. They've now been offered housing, right? So now you're getting, like you mentioned, I mean, somebody who doesn't have any substance abuse or their need for extra support or, whatever it is. Anyway, so they're trying to get into that housing. Well, now they're going to get put into groups of people who maybe, and I'm not pegging people against people, but maybe somebody who's
the government. It's the government that does that. It's the government that pits everybody off against each other. Not us.
Yeah.
It's the government that does it.
Yeah, and now like one of my neighbors explained to me, like, as an example, like she said that one of her friends had basically was offered housing and moved in, and I said, oh, okay, so how did that go? Well, she likes the place, but her neighbors, unfortunately, they have a policy in the building, and you can't do drugs in the building. Well, unfortunately, there's heavy duty drugs that are going on in the building. And it's annoying, really upsetting her surroundings. But the government says, well, if you move, then we can only put you into one more housing type after that. And so now she feels very vulnerable, apparently. She doesn't like the atmosphere around that she has to deal with because the cops keep showing up there, and the health officials had shown up there for I guess to deal with the situation. They did a wellness check on the individual also. And I mean, really, like, people just want a safe place they can call home.
When Kent and I both worked for Connectra, and we were trying to find other people with disabilities jobs, I had a couple clients, one in particular that I remember. He was in a really unsafe house environment where he had a neighbor that was literally trying to kill him almost every single day.
Wow.
And like, quite literally.
Terrible.
And so the BC Housing said, okay, we'll move you this one time. Same thing. They said, we'll move you this one time, but complain one more time, and we're going to kick you off. No questions asked. We're going to kick you off because it's your fault. It's your fault that somebody's trying to kill you. Again, kind of like gaslighting again, right? It's like the government says it's your fault. You have a some guy trying to kill you, so we're going to penalize you and say a one time, ask one more time, and then we're not going to we're not going to move you again.
Well, the thing is, Neil, is my neighbor, like her daughter's friend is basically in that housing. She wants to get out of it. She just, like, she said the same thing to the it was a provider to the BC Housing. It was like one of the providers, right? And yeah, she just said, she goes, you know what, I'd rather go and pay high market rent and be around some other people. As her neighbors were actually fine, but she just wanted cheaper housing. And again, I mean, people just want cheaper housing. So she went into that. She, I guess because of her situation, they got her in quickly. And yeah, I mean, that worked out good for her. She lucked out, but now she wishes that she would have just stayed. And so she asked her landlord if she could move back in. Oh yeah, get this. So she was paying $1,140 something dollars. Yeah, her landlord said, yeah, you can move back in. Her same unit now is going for $2,100. Oh, nothing was different was done to it. Wow. So if she would have just stayed, she just wanted cheaper rent. Yeah. So now she'll get to pay higher rent. Wow. She said she couldn't move back in, so she doesn't know what to do. Her whole PWD check couldn't even pay it just to pay a roof over her head, not including hydro or tenant insurance. Yeah. So I don't know. I like your idea, Kent, on that. It needs to be based on a portion of the market of the housing, and I don't know how that would get calculated in, but yeah, I like your idea on that. I really do.
So like a 30% rate on a $2,000 market rent apartment, like kind of like the one you just described. Yeah. Then that would be like $600. $600 or $700. Exactly. On a portable subsidy type of strategy.
Yeah, and the person can now put that money that they were paying for high market rent, they can now put that money back into the community that they live in and help small businesses grow and take care of themselves, buy the medical needs that they need for themselves, healthier food, etc., etc. Everybody wins. Yeah.
Absolutely. And besides the idea that food is medicine, I think that the government and other policymakers don't often consistently consider the degree to which all of us, but especially if you have disabilities or chronic conditions, there are a litany of out-of-pocket healthcare expenses that are not covered for anybody anywhere.
Yep.
Exactly. You have to then qualify for different subsidies, but you have to have all these conditions in order to get that extra. Say if you need a vitamin supplement or you need a nutritional supplement, or there's different conditions,
or half a wheelchair.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than just boosting the incomes up where people can buy what they need. I remember having a discussion before we on the show. I remember having a discussion with my doctor one time because the workers, they would say, well, Brent, you apply for all these different subsidies. You can boost up your income. I said, tell your doctor that and see, let me know what he said. So I went to my doctor. He goes, what's the problem? Is seasonal allergies I was suffering, and I had a cold at the same time, so it combined. I'm sorry, you have to tough it out, just like these subsidies. What? I can't qualify you. You don't have this. You don't have that, this, that. What is the government talking about? I can't lie on an application, Brent. Sorry. I go, what? Yep. Tell you the government, no, phooey on that. It's like, I can't qualify you for different conditions, and you don't want those conditions anyway. You already live with your disability. Do you want more? As you get older, you're going to get more. Look at the doc. I go, what? What, you have a disability? He goes, anyway, nice to talk to you. But I guess my point of the matter is, boost up people's incomes so they can make that autonomy decisions that are based on what they need rather than what the government says they need.
Mm-hmm. Just before we wrap, I'll just bring it full circle by mentioning again part of my experience related to part of what you guys were discussing before about the development of the Canada Disability Benefit, because there was a time during the pandemic, after that whole Canada Disability Benefit conversation had started, when there was a staffing effort for the sort of the grassroots group that was going to carry the idea of the Canada Disability Benefit forward. they were looking to fill certain key staff positions at that time, and those positions have since been filled predominantly with former Paralympians with disabilities, for example. But I got a call from my friend Luca Patuelli, who is someone that listeners of this podcast might know because he is a fairly well known in certain circles international performer who has a form of muscular dystrophy, but he does breakdancing routines with forearm crutches, basically.
Lazy legs, right? Is it lazy legs?
That's right. It's Luca Lazy Legs Patuelli.
Yeah.
And I had the pleasure of working with Luca back in 2010 when, in the last big production event that I was involved in before I went all healthcare all the time, was as a segment producer for the opening ceremonies of the 2010 Paralympic Games. And Luca and some of his colleagues turned out to be the feature act that I was able to bring in for that performance. And so Luca and I have stayed in touch over the years, and he had been working with this grassroots group that's called Disability Without Poverty. And he said there's a role, there has to be a role for you somewhere here in this effort to bring about the Canada Disability Benefit. And so I said, okay, I'm willing to be considered for that. And I had some conversations with some of the people up the ladder, and essentially what I presented, again from my health and science lens, was the idea that income stability matters because economically stable people are healthier people.
Yep. Absolutely.
But unfortunately, I think past a certain point, this group wasn't particularly interested in a public health justification for the Canada Disability Benefit. They were looking at it more from a sort of militant social justice perspective, and I could tell they also didn't want to get mixed up in the conversation about the federal pharmacare program. And I look at those as complementary efforts, not competitive efforts. But I still believe that economically stable people are healthier people, and that there is absolutely a public health benefit to economic security.
Yeah, exactly. It puts give people the resources and what they need, and they got puts less strain on our healthcare system. I mean, stats have shown that it actually costs less to deal with it, in the right way. But obviously, the government's doing it the other way around. It's now costing more on our healthcare system and putting more strain on it. And with pressures that way, with less doctors, less practitioners, we want to put less strain. So I think we could easily revert it back into a more positive way. What do you think, government? I think we can. I have the can-do attitude, though. Yeah, we can do this.
I think absolutely we should do that. One thing that I say to my students of various kinds, and including, different healthcare teams, different settings, and it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. You don't have to be any kind of healthcare expert. You don't have to be any kind of healthcare expert to understand that prevention is better than treatment every time.
Yes.
Bingo.
Yeah. Mic drop.
So there you go.
We can end the show now.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. It's been a great pleasure. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, just follow the link down below. And we're still looking for a sponsor. So if you want to be a sponsor for the show, definitely contact Neil.
Michael Bublé, we're looking at you.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.